All right, this is going to be what I call the kind of doozy of the project, or at least the drawing that definitely seems the most intimidating. We are going to do the wall sections. We have two wall sections, one that hopefully won't be something that you feel is intimidating. This one, it's actually going to come together pretty darn fast. But then we have this other one in which we're going to add in quite a lot of detail line work, some detail components, some manual hatch work that we're going to add to it. Things that would be really hard to try to model in Revit, so we can just kind of manually add them in using some of that AutoCAD knowledge and basics that we have. Based on where these two views are placed, we have our wall section, the one that was on the left is cut right here, and the one that's on the right of the page was cut right here. The placement of them isn't going to be incredibly important. It's more just so to make sure that that detailed one is going to be cut through this window in some way, shape, or form. And this one here, we're going to focus on making sure that it cuts through this curtain wall area here in some way, shape, or form. So within Revit, I'm going to, in my floor plan view, use the section button to create a section. If I click on the button right up here, it's going to start the section tool. And then I can choose if I want a building section, a wall section, or a detail, which depending on how far I get in the video, we might even do a detail. So I'm going to just do a wall section. I'm going to click where I want it to start and end. Mine's currently the wrong way, so I'm just going to use that little button to flip it. And then I'm also going to just kind of line up where that head sits versus where the tail is. So I know that one's going through my curtain wall, sort of where I want it to. There's not necessarily a direct spot of how far over I want to take it. Then I'm going to go into my level 2 plan. So when I place my next wall section, I can make sure it's going to go into this window. So I'm going to go back into the section tool. I'm going to place another wall section. Again, this one's facing the wrong way. I can use that arrow key to flip it. And then what I'm going to do is zoom in and use the arrow keys on my keyboard to just kind of nudge this into making sure it's in that window. And then, of course, move these heads and tails down so that they're just kind of sitting nice and lined and flush. And so what that has done is in my project browser, it's created a new area called sections, wall sections, in which I have a section number 1 and a section number 2. We'll focus on section number 1 first because it's going to be kind of the easier one to work with. There's a few things we need to update within this section, and that is primarily going to be, first we'll do the scale. We'll update our scale. So this drawing is at 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. Wall sections are typically done or drawn, printed much larger than our actual building and all of our different drawings within the construction documents. So I'm going to update my scale from 1/8 of an inch to, in this case, I'm going to do 3/4 of an inch equals a foot. What that seems like is now that it seems our grid got smaller and our text got smaller, but in reality, what's going to happen when we put this onto a sheet in our last video is this drawing is just going to be bigger. So the drawing got bigger relative to the text. The text is going to stay the same size on each sheet. The next thing I'm going to do is pull this crop region in just a little bit closer. So I'm going to click on the edge of this box. I'm going to pull it a little closer on this side. I could take it out a little bit more. I want at least a little bit of that web to show. And then I'm going to pull it in closer on this side. I'll pull my bottom closer up. I'll pull my top a little bit closer in. And these are just to kind of make adjustments to see if it's going to fit on our page the way we want it to. We're ultimately not going to know until the next video when we go to do the pages, but we can make some adjustments then. And additionally, what I want to change with some of my settings is, let me hit escape a bunch of times, is just my detail level off the bat. Right now we're at a coarse level of detail, so we're not seeing a whole lot. So I'm going to go into my detail level button here, and I'm going to change it to medium, which automatically is just going to bump up a lot of that detail we need to see in our drawing. Now, Another thing when it comes to wall sections in particular is that they have little breaks in between each one of the views. So if I scroll down to my wall sections, we see that this actually is its own separate view of just the foundation. And then there's a small break or a gap here. Then we have this other view of the connection of the top of our curtain wall to the wall. And then we have another view here of where the roof connection's being made. So for my next step, I need to break this down into 3 views or into 3 different breaks. So I'm going to click on my crop region again, and I'm going to use these break tools to create a horizontal break, which is going to make my drawing into 2 different views. I'll focus on this bottom part and just kind of pull that down a little bit. And then I'm going to make this one quite a bit larger until at least I see that top. Let me actually pull it up a bit because this is really the part of the drawing I want to focus on. And then I'm going to use the break tool again to break it into another third where I'm just really have some of my roof detail going on here and then my wall. So now I have it separated into 3 views. I could even further segment it. You can keep segmenting it up. But then I'm going to pull these views using those arrows closer to each other. So that way this larger scale can fit onto a drawing without me having to worry about it. I'm just going to take that window part out of it too and pull that even closer in. So this drawing then is pretty much prepped, complete, ready to go. What I'd also want to do is just make sure all my geometry has been joined. So things like having that solid line here, I wouldn't want that solid line in my final one. Because I joined geometry earlier with the section views, that solid line isn't there. But let's say if I do unjoin from this to this, if they're not joined, I'm going to have that big, ugly line here. So that's why I'm going to use join geometry to say I want my footing attached to my foundation attached to my floor. So that way it's kind of a little bit more of a seamless look to it. But in this drawing, we're not really going to add a lot more detail to it. That's going to be our detail wall section is where we're going to add in all of that tremendous amounts of detail to the drawing. We will also leave our level 4 here. We won't have to erase it within this one. And so at this point, this drawing is ready to go with one thing of hiding our crop region to finalize it to get ready to print. And so that's something we're going to do a lot in the next video, but we can even just preview it here. All I would want to do is click on hide crop region, and then the view seems like it is a heck of a lot more seamless. I'm actually going to show my crop region a little bit more just because I want to get rid of that little line thing, and it doesn't seem like I can hide it without hiding that entire wall. So I'm just going to pull that in ever so slightly more and then hide my crop region. So that way that just ugly line work there isn't going to come in. I'm going to rename this as my wall section number 1. So I'm going to rename. I'm sure I'd love to save my work. Oops. I'm not actually typing in here. Wall section north, south 1. And then we can get to work on our wall section number 2. So this is the one that we're going to put our tremendous amount of detail in. But we're going to start it with the same kind of technique that we started our other view in. So I need to adjust my scale. So I'm going to change my view scale here to 3/4 inch equals a foot, which is going to make everything look like it got smaller when in reality the drawing technically got bigger. And then I'm also going to adjust my detail level. This time I'm going to use a fine amount of detail because I'll sort of need that for this drawing. And then I'm going to bump this crop region just in quite a bit And I'll leave this one actually sitting where it is. I am going to hide a couple of things. So primarily, I'm going to hide this web connection here, and I'm going to put in a different one, a sort of custom one. So I'm going to right click on it, hide in view element, just to make it go away. Not sure why my roof deck isn't showing up with kind of that texture to it that I want it to have, which is kind of a bummer, but I guess that's okay. If I go into edit type, like it has it here, so why is it not showing up in this view? That's a little weird. That might be a 2024 update of sorts, because I believe when I did in 23, it had my little teeth for my metal deck. Technically, this is an exterior one. I don't know if that's going to have any effect on what it looks like, but kind of a bummer, because I always love when those little teeth are in there. Well, we're not going to sit and worry about it too much, I guess. But I have my detail level now set to fine. I'm also going to hide this curtain wall here, and I guess even this rest of this wall assembly. Hide in view elements, hide in view element. I just don't want it visible in this view. I just really only want to focus on this wall. And then I'm also going to break this wall down into its smaller views. So I'm going to click on the crop box, and I'm going to pull it in a little bit down here, not all too much. I might even need to actually take it out a little bit more this way. Then I'm going to break it so I have a part that's just focusing on the foundation. And then I'll pull this one down so I can see that window and wall. And I'm going to break it again, pull it up so I'm looking at the bottom of the window assembly, and then pull this one down so I'm looking at the top of the window assembly. And then finally, I'm going to move these closer. So I'm just going to use those middle arrows to kind of adjust and pull my wall parts closer to each other. That's going to help ensure that they can fit on the page a little bit nicer. I might have to, again, sort of move and finesse things around a little bit, because I could probably move this up a little bit. And we'll see. Right now, I think I'm at a good spot for it, so I'm going to leave it alone for the time being. But as I mentioned, we are going to see. So at this point, some of our work has been taken care of for us. So for instance, if we're looking at the wall section here, quite a few of our hatches have already been filled in for us. Things like our concrete hatch. Our CMU cinder blocks have sort of been filled in, if I zoom in more too. But there's still quite a lot of stuff that we're going to need to have to add in ourselves manually in the drawing. And we can do that either through detail components, or we can do it through regions, or we can do it through detail line work. Each and every piece has that annotation that's pointing to it to explain what exactly it is, but we'll just kind of go through quite a few of them within there. So the first thing we'll add in is we're just going to add in some CMUs for our foundation. And to do that, I'm going to go into the Annotate tab, and I'm going to use this Detail Component tool. This does function ever so slightly differently than the regular component tool. So if you try to load detail components in as regular components, it will not work. So I'm going to click on the component, And I'm going to load in a new detail component for these 12-inch wide CMUs. I don't want to load in this bar here. So I'm going to say load family. I'm going to go into the detail item folder by double clicking. These are divvied out based on national CAD standards, but we can also make some guesses. So if I go like into masonry, then we see we have concrete masonry unit, and we have quite a few ones that we can choose from with here for CMUs. For this one, I'm going to load in a CMU 2-core in section, and I'm going to click open, and it's loaded in a CMU in section, but this is a 4-inch by 8-inch by 8-inch, so not what I want. However, if I open up these properties, we see that there are quite a few others that we can choose from, and we do have a 12-inch by 8-inch by 16, which is the one we are going to want. Another thing you'll see is if I zoom in, we actually have a little mortar joint built into this component. So that's very helpful in just being able to kind of place these and just kind of knock them out as we go. Now what we could do is we could place one and then place another and then place another, which why did mine two disappear? This, or my middle one disappeared, kind of weird, but I was able to just put another one back on top. I could do it like that, where I'm just placing them individually on here. Nothing necessarily wrong about it, but it is just going to be a little time consuming. Sometimes it's also helpful to turn thin lines on when doing this, so we can just make sure that we have like the proper placement of where these are going and how they're placed. See, I think I actually have it a little bit off of my foundation wall, but we're going to put some insulation there anyway. So I'm going to do TL again just to turn it back on. We can place them individually, not the end of the world, especially in this scenario, because of the fact that there's only 3. But in the case of like doing all of the CMUs going up this entire part of the wall, that's going to be sort of a pain in the butt to place each and every one of them individually. So additionally, we have the option to do a repeating detail of a component. So I can click on that little arrow next to component. On your screen, it may be underneath it. And I could say that I want to do a repeating detail, and then we can choose what kind of detail we want. So right now we have the repeating detail of brick. I can go into edit type, and I can make my own new custom one and call this one 8-inch CMU. And then I'm just going to change the detail of what it's doing. So instead of having it be a standard brick, I'm going to say that I want a 2-core CMU of an 8 by 8 by 16. The layout is going to be fixed distance, and for my spacing, I'm going to have this changed to 8 inches. Then what I can do is load it up with the center, click to start, and then, well, whoops, I should have done it on the edge. So let me hit Control Z. I can load it up with my endpoint over here, rather, start it, and where do I want it to end? And it's just going to fill in all of those CMUs going all the way up my wall without me having to put the effort in of placing each one individually. On the top of my wall, I need to load in a new kind of custom CMU one. I need to put in a bond beam up here. So I'm going to hit escape several times to end the command. Now notice though that the component has defaulted to repeating component, but I can click on that arrow to go back into detail. I need to go into load family again. And this time I'm going to find a bond beam single section. And I'll do OK. And now it has loaded one in. Keep in mind it's not the right size at the time, but I can come here and I can change to the size I want. I can place it, hit escape to get out of this command, and then I can continue on with my repeating detail components for the rest of my CMUs, going all the way up until almost that I'm at the top. So I'm going to, usually I don't know why, oh, I know why, this is wall section. I'm going to click on my little arrow and go back into repeating detail. I'm going to use my 8-inch CMU that I created, and I'm going to go up. Usually it gives me a little preview. I don't know why it's not giving me a preview, because that's kind of bugging me. I'm going to go up a few of them, and I'm going to end there because I'm going to need to make a little pocket for adding in my truss system, my little webs here. So I'm then actually going to place a CMU on top of that one. That is not a repeating detail. So I'll hit escape several times, component, detail component. And for this one, I'm going to do a 4-inch or an 8x4, rather 8-inch by 4-inch. I'm just going to put that one on top. That'll give me space to start adding in my detail for my truss. And then I'm going to hit escape again several times, back into my component, repeating detail. And I'm going to just start my 8-inch CMU up until I reach the top of my roof. So instead of drawing or placing each one individually, this is kind of a little bit of a faster way to just be able to crank all of those on there, or in there rather. Additionally, we can do the same thing with our bricks that are on the outside. Those are going to be, let's see where they're pointed to. So they are 4-inch split face CMU veneer. The first thing we need to do is just load them into the project. So I'm going to hit escape several times. Come here and click on this arrow to go to detail component. I'm going to load in a family. And then I'm going to, still in this CMU folder, I'm going to scroll down until I have my split face CMU in section. And I'll open it up. And now it's loaded one in. And again, I could sit and click and then place this one on top of this one. And I could just keep clicking my way all the way up. I didn't put those in line with each other. But that's going to take a lot of time to sit and place each one of those individually. And I don't know about you, but I kind of don't want to. So I'm going to hit escape and then go click on this arrow, make a repeating detail, edit type, duplicate. I'm going to call this one 4-inch. I'm going to call it the veneer CMU because that will, to me, make a little bit more sense. And then for what detail I want it doing, I'm going to use my split face section, 4-inch by 8-inch by 16. Technically, would it matter if I use this 16 or 8? No, because I can't see that depth, but I just always like using the right one. And I'm going to leave my spacing at 8, and I'll click OK, and I'm going to start it on that end. And I can even, for this one, I could just drag it all the way up to where my window is, and it's going to cut off where this cuts, so I don't have to worry about that, which is pretty cool. And then I'll start from on top of my window all the way to where my parapet ends. So that way I can just kind of have those details just going on and repeating all the way up in there. Okay. There's also then a few other components that we can add in here to our drawing. So that way we don't actually have to physically kind of draw them in. One of them being the hold on, why can't I think of words? One of them being the C channels, the kind of pieces of, if I could go into this drawing, furring that are in here. These are also some details within those metals that we can add in. So I'm going to go into Revit, hit escape several times, and I'm going to click on my arrow, detail component, load family. This time I am going to have to get out of my CMU folder.
And I'm going to go back into the detail items. I'm going to go into metals. I'm going to go into structural, I think maybe structural metal stud framing. And here we go. We have a C stud in section. We'll open it up. And if we want to flip it around, we can just use our space bar to flip it. And if we want to change its size, so for this one, we're going to use the 1 5/8. And we're going to place one down here. Or actually, excuse me, I'm in the wrong view. One down here. One here where the top of this one is. Then we've got another one 3 bricks up. 1, 2, 3. And I am, for these ones, I am eyeballing them in place a little bit. I won't pretend I'm not. We've got one sitting right underneath our window. We've got one sitting right at level 2. And then 1, 2, there would be, in this case, since there's one every 4 bricks, 1, 2, 3, 4, there would be one, or is there 3 empty bricks in between them? There's 2 empty bricks in between them, so it would be right here. There would be another one sitting somewhere in this empty abyss, but we don't have anything to look at in that empty abyss. And then sitting above our window, we have another framing piece here above it on that bond beam, and then another one here. So I'm just counting each 3 bricks, and then one right here as well. I believe that is all of the components. Everything else, well, we actually, no, it's not all the components. I lied. We can add components in for this rebar here, or we can draw them in manually. We'll add them as components because why not? So we'll have rebar here and 2 pieces of rebar up here. Then we also are going to load in a detail component for this frame. Even though there was one in there, we want it to show a little bit easier within our drawing. So we are going to just load one in. We can load in a component for this shelf angle, and we can also load in a component for this, I think that's a 1 by 12, sitting up here to give us somewhere to put in our coping and our flashing. So I guess we'll start with the 1 by 12. Why not? We'll kind of start on the top and we'll work our way down. So I'm going to, while I'm still in this tool, or I could hit escape a bunch of times and go back into component, I'm going to say that I want to load in a family, and I'm going to go back into my look in folder, back into detail items, and this time I'm going to put the wood and plastic, and I'm going to go into wood framing, and I'm going to go into nominal cut lumber in section. And I'm going to open that up. This is going to give me a whole list of different ones I could load in. So I could load in multiple sizes at once if I wanted to. I'm just going to scroll until I find the 1 by 12, and I'll say, okay, I'd like to load that in. And if I want to flip it around, I can hit the space bar to flip it. If after I've placed it, I'd like to move it, I can hit escape several times, and I can just click on it and use my arrow keys to adjust it. There's not really necessarily a particular place this has to be. It's just going to give us something that we can nail and adhere that coping to, as well as kind of keep that slope when it comes to those lines in there. Next, we can load in our steel angle shelf that's going to sit here. So that will be another detail component. We'll load in our family. We'll go into look in, details. This one definitely will be in metals. Let's try structural steel framing and see if I can find it in there, which I might have just found it. Yeah, sometimes this is a folder where I don't do too well and I have to kind of hunt quite a bit. But this is the one we want, our angle. I'll click OK. The one we are going to load in is a 4-inch one. So it got me worried that it started with 8, but it seems they're getting smaller. So we'll do a 4x4. I don't think we want the 1/2. Let's do the 4x4 by 1/4. And then OK. And it's facing the wrong way, but I can use my space bar to flip it. And then I'm just going to plop it in my drawing. My next detail component that I'm going to add, well, maybe I should do my filled region first before I add that in. So actually my next detail component, or we'll add it in now. Let's see. Or I'll regret it and then I'll delete it and add it back in. Will be this truss here. So that truss is just so I can make sure that I load the right one in. Let's go see what it's tagged as in my framing plan as I scroll up and up and up and up and up. Whoops, scroll too far. So it's the 14KS. So I'm going to load in another family. Within this one, the folder I want to go into is metals again, I hope. And I believe then steel joist framing. Yes. And then I'm going to put in a side view of a K-series bar joist. It is facing the wrong way when we load it in, but we can easily flip it around. So I'm going to open that in. I want the 14KS. And it's facing the wrong way. I cannot use the space bar though to flip it. What I can do is place it and then hit escape several times, click on it, and I can use the mirror tool, either pick axis or draw axis. And that will just be the axis I pick on, which I didn't click on the right thing. Pick axis, this line, and then I can hit escape, click on the original, delete it, click on this one, and kind of move it into place. Very technical, moving it into place here. I can adjust this line too to be a little bit shorter of where this joist is going. I don't believe I can make this longer though. So that means, what am I going to do? I'm going to crop this in more. And so that way, I don't have to worry about making that longer. Then the next thing we can add in as components are some of our rebar. We have, if I go back into my wall sections, we have rebar sitting here, as well as then 3 pieces of rebar down here. Now, we could also just use the detail line to draw that in, and you might be thinking, Dinah, isn't this also rebar? Why are we not loading that in? This is not a component that we could load in for rebar. This is something that we're going to have to draw in ourselves. The same thing with our bat insulation is not a component that we load in. It is just something that we manually draw in ourselves. But we could load our rebar in, so we might as well just load in our little pieces here. So I'm going to go into the component tool again. And I'm going to say I'd like to load in a family. I'm going to go back into metals, maybe. Let me actually go back into detail items and see if that's where I want to be. because I don't think maybe that is where I want to be. No, I guess it is in metals. It makes sense. Maybe here. But see here, this is where we even have things like anchor bolts, bolt heads. These are not things that you'd have to draw in for these specific details. But I'm just going through and it doesn't look like I see it in here, so I'm going to go back, back. Structural steel framing, not in there. Metal fabrications, I definitely don't want stairs, but again, just to kind of searching these folders sometimes is nice and helpful. But it maybe be in concrete. Aha, it's in concrete. It tried tricking me, but I found it. And so I can find reinforcing steel, rebar in section. Reason why if we couldn't find it, I was just going to draw it is because it is just a circle. And we're going to put number 3 rebar in here. And we're going to very carefully say it's here and here. I measured that out so precisely. And then in our foundation, we're going to put number 8 rebar in our foundation. So I'm going to switch my rebar size to number 8 and say, this one I will try to be a little bit more precise with because I do know at least I want it in the middle. So I'm actually going to place it on that midpoint, and then I'm going to go, let's see, if that's 5.5 over, I got to do math now. You guys know I don't like math. And then I'm going to hit escape a bunch of times, click on 1, hold control, click on 2, hold control, click on 3, and then I'm going to just move those up. I at least kind of want those to be a little bit more centered on there. Show that I at least a little bit care about what I'm doing. But, and I just want to double check, I believe those are all the things that we can load in as components. This is going to be a region that we make and some detailed line work. This is going to be a region that we make. This will be a region. This will be a line work. Filling this in with concrete will be a region. The bad insulation will be its own thing. More line work, more regions and line work. Okay, so I believe that those are all the components we're going to need to load in, but if we need to do more later on, we definitely can. So what we'll do next then is that batt insulation that's sitting inside our 5/8 gypsum wallboard. So I'm going to go into Revit, and now insulation is its own tool or command within the annotate tab. So when we're in annotate, we have detailed lines. What we did in AutoCAD was we made a line and then changed its line type. Insulation has its own function within here. So I can just click on insulation, and then over here is how I can define how wide it is. And what we want to do is make it as wide as this area. If we want to double check, we can use the measure tool to just say what's from here to here, and it's 1 5/8 is what we're going to fill in, is that metal frame. So I'm going to go into insulation. I'm going to make my insulation, I'm actually just going to only do 1.5. So that way it doesn't overpower the rest of the line work. And then I could just say that I want it to go from here, which I believe I'm doing off the center, of course. I'm going to change this to say actually from near side. Just kidding. Far side. So that way I can just come up this bend here. The thing that I really love is that it does fill in nicely and just end the line where it needs to. I'll put more insulation here. So I'm just clicking from each part to the other. And I'll even just bring this one all the way up from that end point to that end point. From, don't know why it's not letting me click on that level. What if I hit escape? There we go. Now it will. And so I'm just filling in my insulation lines. Escape. Sometimes it gets stuck and I have to end the command and start it. Why? Not sure. And a little bit up here too. Right? Or no? Let me place it and then see if it's right. Yes. Okay. So next up would be to add in all of our filled regions within our wall section or our drawing. So adding in things like our concrete filling within all of our CMUs, adding in like different things like our bed of crushed gravel, our rigid insulation. I believe our concrete slabs, some of those hatches are already filled in for us, which is pretty nice and pretty wonderful. But in some cases, we are going to have to add a couple of things in manually. And even then, maybe adjust drawings and things. So one thing you'll notice is that I have this ground line is very, very heavy. And that's just something of being able to kind of add in additions to it. So we'll start our filled regions with our CMUs. We are going to fill them with the hatch pattern sand to make it a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to use in Revit the region tool, and I can either do a filled region or I could do a masked region. So a masked region is what I kind of want to do in the case of where our little webbing is. I want to get rid of any kind of hatch pattern that might be sitting in there just to make it an empty space. Or a filled region is going to be a 2D view where we can then fill it with a hatch pattern for something that may not be modeled into our drawing. So we're going to create a filled region within these CMUs. So when I click on it, we'll see here that it's currently saying it's going to do a diagonal crosshatch. Before I place it, I could also change it afterwards though. I'm going to do an edit type and I'm going to duplicate and make one called my concrete fill. Whatever you name it, you can name it whatever you want. It's going to only operate based on just what's going on in here. I'm going to change its pattern. So I'm going to click on it and then click on my dot, dot, dot. And I'm going to adjust this one to a, where is it? I guess I could do the gypsum one. Or I could do sand. Do I want sand dense or sand loose? I'm going to do sand dense for these ones instead of the regular sand. And I'll leave the line weight and everything else in here alone. And I'll click OK. And then I'm going to draw a rectangle just from this corner here to this corner here and say, cool, please make my hatch. And why is it showing nothing? Bring to front. There we go. I don't want it that much front. I have no background. Why is it doing that? It's because I have masking turned on, so I need to turn masking off. There we go. Okay. So what that's done is it's filled it in with the concrete pattern. Yes, it did in areas where, like, frankly, I would have liked if this was more just an empty seal, but even then, that is going to be filled with concrete from piece to piece, so it does technically make sense. And then, especially when we have it on a piece of paper, you're not really going to notice that. We're also going to fill in these regions up here for our CMUs that are going up our wall. And I can do a really big one too to just fill this whole thing up. So I'm going to use the region tool. It's using my concrete fill one that I used last time.
And I'm going to just make a rectangle. And this time I'm going to go from this corner. I don't know why it's not snapping to that corner, but okay. What if I start from down here for my rectangle? I can even kind of eyeball it into place a little bit. And I'm just going to have it travel all the way up to here. Because of the fact that this is not going to even be part of the drawing, it won't really matter when it comes to my actual drawing part. And then I'm also going to do filled regions up here. So I'll hit escape several times, region. I'm going to fill a region from here, which, whoops, I'm not in the rectangle tool. So I'm going to click on rectangle. Up to here and say, please create. And then I'll do another, hit escape a bunch of times, another filled region from here. I'm in the line tool. Keep forgetting I doesn't put me in rectangle automatically. All the way up to here. And then, okay. I'm not too worried about if it's on that line or inside that line because the line weight's going to take care of that for me. But this way, then I have it filled with that concrete pattern. We have a few more patterns also that we're going to use or bring in. So we have, let's focus kind of working our way. Since we're at the top, we'll go from the top and we'll work our way down because that to me is what makes sense. Is we have this 1/2-inch layer of deck cementous board. Which I'm actually going to draw to be like a little bit larger than 1/2 inch. We'll see. We'll see if we like how it looks when we just only have it as a 1/2 inch. I forgot I wasn't in Revit, so I was trying to draw it. So I'm going to do a region. I'm going to make a box. And I'm just going to place it kind of over here. Make it a little bit larger this way. This is way too large for what I want it to be. So I'm going to try 0.5. I guess we can use it at that size. I'm actually going to make it just visually. I'm going to do 0.6 just so it looks going to look a little bit larger. And then I also want to adjust its line weight for it. So I'm going to hit escape a few times to get out of the drawing tool. Then I'm going to highlight the entire piece and I'm going to change its line type from thin lines to medium and click OK. And what I've done is I've made that box. I can move it into place if I want. Keep in mind where we're moving it is just going to be kind of eyeballing it a little bit. Sorry if that bugs you. But I don't have the right fill within it. So I can change it afterwards. I can click on it and I can use edit type to change the type that it is. So we want vertical lines in this one. And then if I click OK, it is now vertical lines. If I forgot to change the line weight, I could double click on it, highlight this whole box, and then I can change the line type or the line weight. So you can change the line weights after the fact when you are creating these and drawing these regions. But I'm just going to click X because I don't want to change that. So I'm just going to leave that board there for now. I might even honestly just use these grips to just beef it up a bit because it just looks way thinner than it actually was or should be. We are also going to want to create a region inside of the wall area here because of the fact that we just want it to be a solid white. So to do that, I'm actually going to create a masking region. And I'm going to create a rectangle just within this area and click OK. Now what you're going to notice when I hit escape off of it is that it covered everything, which is kind of nice, but I didn't want it to cover everything. I just wanted it to cover that hatch in the background. So that's when I can do things like click on this shelf and say I want to bring it to the front. That's going to put it in front of that mask. And I can click on this web and say bring it to the front. And that'll bring it in front of the mask. So this way I can have this without having that hatch pattern that's just coming from the back of our wall assembly. This was all just based off of our wall assembly in here. Our next region is going to be, let's see, what will our next region be? We don't need to fill anything in here. All of this is all covered and taken care of for us. Pretty cool, pretty neat. We'll have some line type things we'll have to adjust. We can also, in this window assembly, to get these hatches to show up here within that window assembly, what we can do is click on the window. We can do edit type. We can edit the material. So I'm just going to click on this metal aluminum, click on my dot, 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 and I want to add a cut pattern. So I'm going to add a foreground pattern of aluminum, click OK, click apply, and then it's going to put that pattern in for us automatically on those aluminum pieces. Let's see, I think the only other ones we're going to have to fill in are sitting in our ground. So we have 2 hatches that we're going to add in here and another hatch that we're going to add in here for our French drain. So we're going to do those pretty much using the same method that we used for our other areas. I'm going to go into Revit. I'm going to create a region. I need to click on this little arrow. So this way I'm doing a filled one and not a masked one. And then I'm going to draw a rectangle in for my 2-inch rigid insulation. So I'm going to just pick somewhere to start it. And then I'm going to draw it out. This one I will make 2 inches. And I'm going to want it to have, I believe, some wide lines to it. So I'll hit escape several times, highlight the whole thing, and change it to wide lines. You can also change those beforehand if we can remember to. With the next one, for the gravel bed, I'll try to remember to. And then we can also change its type for the rigid insulation. We're going to want an ortho crosshatch. And then I can hit the green check. And then I can also move this into place a little bit more. So there's not really an amount. I have it away from here. I'm just kind of eyeballing it into place, knowing that I'm going to have to add in like a hidden line sitting underneath there that's going to represent my moisture barrier. So I'm kind of just eyeballing everything into place a little bit. Then I also have a 6-inch bed of crushed gravel sitting underneath it, which has a medium line. So I'll go into Revit. I'm going to draw in another region. If I change my line beforehand to medium, I just don't have to highlight it after the fact to redo it. And then I'm going to draw a rectangle from here down 6. And I'm going to change this one to be gravel, which looks like isn't preloaded in. So I'm going to do edit type. I'm going to duplicate it, make a new one called gravel, and then I'm going to change its pattern into dense sand, because there is no gravel pattern in Revit like there was in AutoCAD, unfortunately. We can make our own new custom ones and like load ones in, but we don't have time to get into that in this class, unfortunately. I will leave this one as a masking one because I do want this one to mask. These ones I didn't. And then I'll say okay, And I've got my 6-inch bed of gravel there with my line weights already set. And then for other regions, we have our 1-inch backer board over 1-inch rigid insulation, and then our French drain system here. And that should be all of our regions, she says with so much confidence. For this one here, we could kind of approach it really in one of two ways. What I think would make more sense is just to draw 2 boxes, but really what we could do, if we zoom in on it, is we could draw one big box and then draw a line down the middle, but I'm just going to do it as 2 boxes. So I'm going to make a region. This one is going to use the line style of wide lines, and it's going to use a pattern of the ortho crosshatch. And I'm going to make a box that's, I guess I could put it right on that corner. And it's supposed to be 1 inch in thickness. And then another one right next to it that's also a 1-inch box. So I'm going to region on that point. I'm not in the rectangle tool. I'm still going to keep it on wide lines. Straight down. After I place it, I can then edit this witness to also make this one not 1 foot, 0, 1, 1 inch. That way I have those 2 boxes there. And then I can add in my French drain. So for the French drain system, we are not going to use a rectangle because it's obviously not a rectangle here. Instead, what we're going to do is draw out kind of a slanty box, and then we're going to use a fillet tool to kind of curve these in. And I'm not going to be too precise with it because this is more of just a visual cue, not something that anyone's going to measure out for. So I'm going to go into my region tool yet again. For my line style, I'm going to switch it to medium. It's always kind of good to switch it beforehand if you can remember. And then I'm going to start it close to here, but not straight on there. I'm going to go up a random amount. I didn't measure it. I'm going to go out at an angle or a certain amount. I could change it afterwards if I don't like it. I'm going to go down to where this footing is, which it doesn't look like I can find, but I'll just figure out where it sits. I'll hit escape. I'll bring that one out to meet it, so that way I don't have to sit and try to guess it. So I've just made this shape here, and what I'm going to do next is I'm going to use this Fillet Arc Tool, which is going to make a rounded corner between those 2 intersects. So I'm just going to click, and then just determine how much I want that curve to be. Click, and try to eyeball this one into the same amount. I can also type in here that I want this to be not 4 foot. I can click on that arc and say, so this one's at 4 inches. This one's also at 4 inches. So I did kind of eyeball them to be the same. And for this one's pattern as well, I'm going to use the same one that I used for gravel. Really, I could have also technically used concrete fill because they all have the same pattern, but this is also going to be gravel in here. And I'll click OK. And then I'm going to add in my 4-inch French drain. For this one, I could do a masking region if I wanted to, but I'm going to do just a regular region. So I'm going to do region. I'm going to make a circle that's around here, and I want a diameter of 4 inches. So I'm going to make it a 2-inch circle in total for radius. I'll hit escape several times because I also want to highlight it and change its line style to wide. And then for its fill, instead of solid black, I'm going to do edit type. I'm going to duplicate and say white. And then I'm going to use the pattern. So click on pattern. Where's solid? Solid doesn't exist. Here we go. Solid fill. And then for color, I'm going to choose white. And then I'll say, please make. And so I could have done that with a masking region as well, but I just sort of, I don't know, prefer this one instead. That should be, let me just double check looking at it. That should be all of our regions filled in. And now kind of our last part of our wall section would be adding, or our second to last part rather, would be adding in all of our different line types for things like rebar. So there are a few things in here that, like this curved piece of rebar here, this curved rebar, we have this hidden line for our membrane. We have this rebar traveling all the way up. We have heavy lines here that aren't showing up as heavy in our drawing. We also have, there is this dashed line going all the way up along our rigid insulation for our house wrap. And then we have all of the lines up here for our coping and our flashing. These are not components that we can load in. These are just lines that were manually drawn in using the detail line tool. So I'm going to start it from the bottom, since that's where we currently are in Revit, by just doing these pieces of rebar. So I'm going to use my detail line tool for these lines. For a rebar, I'm going to change my line type to wide. And I'm just going to draw in one that goes from here to around. If it will let me line up with that midpoint, that'd be great. Or I've got a better idea. I'm actually going to hit escape, and I'm going to draw it from this midpoint straight down until I get to around here. I'm just eyeballing that again, and then I'm going to go straight out. I'm going to hit escape once, and then I'm going to use the Fillet Arc Tool to fillet this corner. About, we'll say that much. Because this line is just going to go all the way up until it reaches where that window is, I kind of wanted it nice and centered on there. For my other one that's over here, especially since I eyeballed this one into place, what I'm going to do is hit escape a bunch of times. I'm going to click on these three segments. So I'll click on this one, hold control, click on this one, while still holding control, click on this one. And I'm going to do a mirror where I draw the axis as this middle. And I'll go click there, and I'll go straight up to click there. This has now made me a duplicate along the center of this. My endpoint is just way too high, but I can drag that line end down. And I'll drag it down until I'm only within this part of my building here. I've also got a little bit of flashing here that's just going to be drawn in with a medium line. What is that angle it's put at? I usually just kind of eyeball things into place a little bit. I don't really use too many measurements. I'm sure that's the incorrect way to do it, but that is how I in fact do it. So I'm going to do a detail line. I'm going to change my line type to medium. As long as I'm going to be able to just kind of cover up this little area, so that way as water comes down here, it's not going to go onto my material here. That's the intention of what that flashing line is showing. We also then have that hidden line here for our membrane. So while I'm still in the command, I can switch myself over to the hidden one. And I'm just going to draw a line across here. I don't like where I've placed it, so I'm going to hit escape a few times. And I'm just going to click on that line and zoom in and kind of move it so it's a little bit more noticeable in the drawing. Sometimes drawings can get a little much and a little overbearing, so it is hard to kind of see and notice these pieces. Then we also have some flashing underneath our window, and then we're going to bold up these lines in the window frame. So I'm going to come up to my window, detail line, switch my line type to medium, and then I'm going to just draw a line about here and then down. I usually go down about 3/4 of an inch at that angle. Then I'm also going to, while in the detail line tool, so I'm going to go detail line, switch my option here to wide line, and then I'm going to, can even use, the pick line is going to be kind of annoying here. So I'm actually just going to use the line tool to just manually draw. I'm going to Control Z because I wanted that to go straight around my window frame here. So sometimes if Revit doesn't do necessarily with the line weights what you want it to do, you can manually just override things to have the line weight you want. And the same thing then with the top of my window frame, still in the detail line, still in wide lines. I'm going to trace around. Might help if I actually stop in the right spot. We also then have some flashing in here that we're going to have to add in for the top of our window just to kind of prevent any water from getting in here. So I'm going to go back into Revit, detail line. I'm going to switch myself over to the medium line. Again, a lot of this is me just kind of eyeballing things into place. And then I'll go straight down, over, and I'll hit escape a couple times. I don't like how far down I went with that, so I'm just going to bring this up a little bit. It just doesn't look like, yeah, here I haven't gone as far down. And actually, we need to load in another little metal bracket in here for that bond beam. So I'm not sure if no, we did have to pick that one out. So I'm going to go back into component. I'm going to load in a family. I'm going to go back into my folders for detail items, metal. God, that was in structural steel framing, wasn't it? The angle shape, yeah. It was right at the top and I went past it. This one's going to be a 5 by 5 by 3/8. I see 5 by 3. Where's my 5 by 5 by 3/8? I went right past it. And then I can switch over here to my 5 by 5 by 3/8. Spacebar to flip it.
Looks like I'm gonna have to move my flashing around a little bit because I definitely don't have it now in a visible spot. So I'm gonna move this line over. I'm gonna see if I can get my line there. I might just have to delete that line entirely. Seems like that's coming through real thick. There's a way I could change that one. And then detail line. Then we've also got another line here for our rebar that's coming through our wall. So we're going to use, again, a medium, or actually a wide line there, excuse me. And we're going to bring it up to where this shelf angle sits. So I'm going to go into the detail line. I'm going to switch myself over to wide. And I'm going to do it just down the middle, eyeballing where I'm putting this end. And then up and eyeballing again where I have it finish. And then we have our kind of coping pieces too that we're going to work with. And so this is the one that might frustrate or upset some of you, because especially with the way I do it and I kind of just wing it or eyeball it. So I apologize in advance. I'm going to do a detail line. I'm going to switch my line type to medium. And I'm going to start a line here. I can also afterwards kind of move it into place for how far off it's coming off this one. Down pretty close, but not necessarily right on top of it, and then bring that line over. Actually, I think this is supposed to be wide, not medium. So let me just actually Control Z to undo all of that. Didn't look very thick. So I'm going to do a detail line, wide lines. Yeah, I think I did want wide. Over to at least be past that. And then I'm going to use the Fillet Arc to just make this have a curve. If I wanted to even type in a specific amount, like if I wanted like 3.5, I can place it, and then afterwards I can edit like that witness to be, I did 3.5 feet. I do that often within this, at least. And that way I could have a specific arc size if that's something that I needed. If I wanted this to be a specific distance away from something, I can, or I can even just kind of eyeball it into place, which is what I kind of prefer to do. Then I'll do another detail line. This one's kind of sitting from about here out. I went a little too far out. Down, and then we have a nice little flare. So I'll hit escape, and I'm just going to kind of move that a little bit closer. Now I think that flare is a little bit too much, so I'm going to take it down a notch. And then I'm going to do one more detail line, this time around this. And I can adjust these kind of copes afterwards. This goes up at a small angle, and then down, and then out. I actually don't kind of mind where I have it. I just might want to take this one out a little bit more. But I think honestly I kind of eyeballed that pretty darn well, in my opinion. Maybe bring this angle down a little bit. Bring that line down to meet it.
I don't know why those aren't joined anymore. For this coping detail up here. And I think then I have one more line to add, which is that house wrap hidden line that we really only kind of see when we're looking at where that window sits. So I'm going to do detail line, hidden, and then I'm just going to run it right down this line all the way until I get to where that is. Because if we look at it in here, we can't really see that line there at all. It's only right here is where we're seeing it. And it's kind of just showing us too where that wall sits behind this. So our very last step of this whole procedure then is going to be adding in all of our annotation details. And so it's the exact same way we would add in, oh, actually, hold on, I gotta beef up this grade line too, and then add my annotation details. But it's done the same way we would approach putting them in within the floor plans where we're just using the text tool. And I super recommend that you kind of just work your way through one side, moving them up along the list or going down along a list and then going to the other side and kind of doing them one at a time when you're just trying to recreate the ones that are being shown on here. So to beef up this grade line, I'm going to use detail line wide, and I'm going to draw a line sort of next to this, hit escape a bunch of times, and then I'm going to click on that wide line, and I'm just going to move it like that. And even then I could make a copy of it and make another one if I wanted to, so I can make this line kind of as beefy as I want to show it and adjust it. And as a refresher for all of these text boxes, what we would do is we can even, oh no, I thought I would be able to highlight that text and copy it. Okay, looks like I sort of can. So I can Control C to copy this text. I can go into Revit, say I want to use the text box. I'll just have one arrowhead, point it to where I want it to go. Where do I want the text box? And then Control Paste. So at least this way I don't have to type out each and every one of those. So that could be a little bit of a nicer way to get them in there. Keep in mind too then when you wanted to have a angle to it. So I could then even take this guy, Control C to copy, go into Revit, text. I could then say that I want to have a 2-segment one, or where does it start, and then bring it out, and then Control V to paste. My next one in here is for this sill flashing. Control C to copy that text. Keeping with this 2-segment one, where I'm starting, ending, and it will still show you, or is it going to make me a liar? Thank you. I was like, it's still going to show you when those two are lined up. And I could put my flashing in and then keep just working my way up with all of my little notes, and then flip myself over to this side and work my way down through all my little notes. So that is how we put together a detailed wall section. As I mentioned, this one is a doozy of it, but hopefully this helps you get your project finished.